And how about this? Give us a quick rundown of your credentials.
Okay, I have a PhD in political science, which I received from the Free University of Berlin. I am, of those of you that can hear it, I'm from the Midwest. I grew up on a buffalo ranch in North Dakota. And after getting my bachelor's degree in communication and international studies in German, I moved to Berlin and got my master's and PhD at the Free University. I was a Fulbright scholar in Latvia, where I looked at something we don't call them post Soviet countries anymore, but back when I was doing my research, that's how they were bundled up. I looked at newly forming democracies, small states, and how they negotiate with superpowers. And I used the Baltic states as my key case studies there. I stayed in Germany, worked at the German Council on Foreign Relations, also worked at the German Parliament. Then I went to India, did some communications consulting, and now the past 15 years, I really specialize in what I call policy advocacy communication. And what that is, when government funded programs or international organizations go somewhere, whether it be the UN, the EU, or US aid, and I make communication strategies with them. And it's getting harder and harder through social media because there is a institutional resistance
Oh,
for governments to use these platforms. So I've been introducing decision makers to how to use social media effectively.
you should. I was invited along with 10 other creators in this country and 15 other creators around the world to attend the NATO 75th annual summit. So NATO is deeply concerned about the social media disinformation campaign that the enemies have launched. And they realized, okay, the best thing we could do is to fight fire with fire
Yeah, that's
or
right.
fire with water. And so it's important. That's something I don't know, maybe you could bring that to their attention.
They have, and I'm sure you spoke with some of them. They've been working on this, and it's a multi-layered process. First
Yeah.
of all, you need to be able to literally translate these complex security topics into the type of language that someone that's passively scrolling on social media wants to stay and learn about. And a lot of times, government organizations think that social media is about making someone do a funny dance or doing a trend. But my recipe for success has always been the value add. You
Mhm.
give someone information that they appreciate.
Yeah.
You don't ask for anything. You consistently build credibility. And that's a model also that can be translated into how governments and government agencies should work on social media. Now,
Yeah.
they don't have to be boring, but they do need to have fact-based information. They need to build trust and they need to take up space, right? I've told a story on TikTok about a year and a half ago in Germany. I ran into a politician from the Green Party. He was
Hmm.
at the top, the co-chair of the German Green Party, and name was Amit Nelby. He's still, his name isn't important, but I said, "Hey, do you want to come on a TikTok with me or do an interview?" And he said, "No, I don't have anything to do with that Chinese app. It's not secure. I don't want it on my phone. I don't want to be part of it." Well, good. We had the situation in Germany like we've had throughout Europe in 2024, where a lot of governments have shifted to the far right or shifted to the right. And this also happened in Germany. And um, another friend of mine, I'm going to circle into what this means in a second. His dad is a politician in Bavaria, and they went to visit a school. And they went with members of this far right party in Germany, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, and the school children all knew the far right politicians. And my friend's dad was like, "How do they know you guys?" And they said, "Oh, we're on TikTok." And in Eastern Germany, in the elections, the far right did very well.
Yes.
And this is when the main political parties realized they need to take up space. Now, we saw this with the NATO influencers, which I watched you. I was so jealous, but I was so happy for you. And there are more think tanks and organizations that are doing this. Right. Just recently, I was named a fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis because of what I do on social media.
Wonderful.
And they recognize that the research they do needs to be accessible to people because it's that whole thing. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, did it really fall?
Yeah.
And you do great research and explain things to people. Does it matter if only 15 people read the paper? Matters.
Matters less. That's the interesting. So there are two things I want to say to reinforce your point. These idealists said, oh no, I want nothing to do with TikTok. Okay, that's fine. But if you're not doing it, your competition is, and your competition is gaining all of the benefits and they're defeating you. They're taking away your power. That's one thing. Two, a lot of people don't want to be spoken at. A lot of people don't want to be spoken to didactically. And I think a lot of government arms, they just can't help it. They immediately think that, oh, if I just start giving away the information, it's going to help. No, people, they want entertainment. They also don't want to feel as if they're being spoken down to. And I've noticed that whenever I've gone into real detail with my posts, I get very low views because people just, they don't want to, they don't want to have to go so low level. So the best strategy that I've benefited from was first a hook of self-interest. Mention your topic as to how it really affects them in an urgent manner. And then you speak to them as if you're having a conversation, like they're going to be giving you input, and try to assume some of their questions and then give the explanation, a very simple explanation. And it'll lead them further to getting the information you actually want to give them.
That's true. That's a great way to do this. I still have a tough time with the hooks. I try to come in more with energy than hooks because I want to be really careful about not misleading. Not that you mislead, but sometimes I'm just not creative enough to think about how to present things. And
Well, you can ask a question. You can ask a question that, like perfect example. What was it? Okay, I said so. I've been hearing this like nonsensical assertion. Oh, Donald Trump is going to crash the U.S. dollar. That's what people are telling me. So I started that post yesterday. It didn't do very well, but I think TikTok is just kicking the crap out of me right now. I just went, no, Donald Trump is not going to crash the US dollar. I'm not a fan of the man. I didn't vote for him, but he doesn't have the power to crash the US dollar. And I did get a lot of engagement, but TikTok's, no, we're not going to share it. No, we're not putting.
I think that's very interesting because this new environment, I'm sure that you've detected changes in this since October last year.
Oh, boy.
And the advice that I would always give other people for strategies is just consistency of posting. And it's sometimes hard to take your advice in life and also when you're advising other people. I think that we're going to see a lot more changes in how the algorithms work.
Mhm.
And I think what's really being underestimated is the amount of importance algorithms are going to take on in terms of shaping narratives.
Yes.
There has been some preliminary discussions, and of course, there's no research out on it yet, of how DeepSeek is portraying historical
Oh, yeah.
information, and it's free. Now, who doesn't like to use a free platform? I spend my 1999 on ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and a different quality when you use good prompts does come out when you have the paid version, but not everyone wants to do that, right? I know people that make a point of not paying for anything ever on the internet. I understand that. And if you're relying on that as a source and you're only getting part of the story, and it's lies of omission sometimes, right? Misleading through omission.
Clever.
Well,
It's very
and
clever
yeah,
because you get to alter the narrative in your favor, but also you get to destabilize certain markets. And I think the whole craze that happened over the past few weeks with the release of DeepSeek, and people are saying, oh my gosh, it's better than ChatGPT, and they did it for a fifth of the cost. That was all nonsense. They just literally piggybacked off of ChatGPT. So they let ChatGPT actually train all the data, and then they're using what they have to just keep rehashing it. So it destabilized the market. It created a lot of uncertainty, especially for NVIDIA. And I like this. I like that even though there are manipulated narratives, but it's a democratization of AI. And that's beautiful. I don't care who does it. I think it's a great move because it weakens the monopoly of this great intelligence, but it empowers everybody else. On that, go deep seek. I'm not afraid of it. I don't think it's going to make what we have redundant. It is inadvertently helping a lot of people.
Yeah, but like when you were a kid, assuming that your dad had tools, did he just give you the saw and say, "Have fun, Geo Saw. Go nuts, little Geo"?
No, it's true. AI can be a saw, but it could also be food. It could also be a band-aid.
Absolutely.
You know?
But what the analogy that I maybe didn't do so well there was it's a tool and you can use it for so many things, but you need to understand how to use it. And I'm hoping that kids are learning how to use it. They're learning about the hallucinations. They're understanding the importance of human in the loop. They are maybe understanding how large language models work. They're learning how to do good prompting. They're also understanding that, and this is a big concern of mine. Early on, when you used to ask ChatGPT to finish sentences, you would say, "A man went shopping," and the answer would be to pick up a bottle of milk. And a woman left the house to do the whole shopping. And there was a little bit of sexism and stuff. And it's something that is going to also reinforce stereotypes if you're not careful. So I
But
think
we're already
that
dealing with that. We've been dealing with that for centuries. Even 100 years ago, we had William Randolph Hearst, just like controlling most of the mainstream media, controlling all of the narratives. That's always been the case. But these kids today, at least in America, they'll be getting one type of propaganda that's possibly pro-Western. But if they're using DeepSeek, it gets counterbalanced by Eastern propaganda. And sometimes you get a synthesis that leans more towards the truth.
I'm watching the developments with caution. I think it's good that and anything that opens things up to the public and
Yes.
anything that makes knowledge accessible
Yeah.
is so important. We've had this conversation before. I think the last time we had talked, you were deferring to me academically, but I don't like that because it makes people think that they don't have a right to talk about things. And everyone has a right to talk about things. Everyone has a right to their opinion. Facts are facts, though. It's something that I really want to encourage people to talk about these things because, what you had said before about making information accessible and not being arrogant or over intellectualizing things, I think that's really important because
Right.
we need to pick up people where they are. And this is what this app has been great for, what TikTok has been great for, what other platforms have been good for. But at the same time, we've been giving it a lot of accolades without really understanding how much the algorithm is influencing us.
It has, there's a lot of soft and hard influences that this app has because one, it pushes any kind of extremist propaganda, be it on the left or on the right. It doesn't favor a lot of moderate content. And just the fact that you may not see a lot of views based on what you want to talk about, you find yourself talking about other things in a different way. So it's manipulating you to reinforce a certain narrative sometimes. Not you per se, but just
No.
reader. I'm just like, skirt. But not everyone's that way.
It's very frustrating. Hey, Rebel Intel just joined us. I'm a huge fan of his. Do you follow him?
I think I do. Do you want him on?
And that's up to you. I don't.
I'll bring him on. Hello, Rebel Intel. How you doing?
Hello, can you hear?
Oh,
I can hear you.
All
Can we
right.
see you?
I had to turn off my Bluetooth so you don't get an echo. How you guys doing today?
good.
Well,
How are you?
thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to see you guys. I love both of you guys.
Are you in Texas?
I am in Texas. Thank you.
Did you see my post about Texas?
I didn't. What's up?
Oh no, I made a post about how Texas could beat the crap out of Russia by itself.
That's probably true.
Because it's just people don't understand just like how big Texas is and how much oil and agriculture comes out of Texas. Also, like how many troops come out of Texas in all branches of the military, or how much aerospace defense. And the official number for how many weapons Texas has per thousand people is 34. I'm like, quite closer to 2,000 of those things per thousand people. If you've ever been to Texas,
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's just going to keep growing. That's scary in a way because we're in the North Dallas suburbs near Frisco, Denton, the Colony, McKinney, and we can literally watch this city growing like you're watching a Sim City on high speed with no economy restrictions. It's crazy.
but that's cool.
It's cool in a way because they put the PGA in here. They're building a
What's
Universal
the
Studios,
PGA?
the Professional Golfers Association.
Uh,
They moved their headquarters from Atlanta to Frisco.
okay.
That's a big deal. They're bringing in a Universal Studios near Frisco. I believe they're expanding to a third airport. They have Love Field near downtown and DFW near Grapevine. I think they're going to build another airport near McKinney.
Mm.
So
But so you're saying a city is being built, so they're building houses and buildings. So I often use Texas as an example for this. It's like we have such a real estate shortage and house prices are just the national average has doubled in the past 12 years because of overregulation. But if you go to Texas, they don't have such an inflation problem when it comes to home values because they're not restricting building. Who makes the most money off of all these like real estate restrictions? The people who already own the real estate.
there are it's a little bit of a two-edged sword, I think. I agree with you about 90% there. It's a little bit more complex. There are a couple of the home builders out here, forget the name of them, DB something or other. They're building a little bit too much, unregulated, is maybe a little bit unchecked. I don't know what it's doing for the market or security and stability wise, but overall, you're correct. I think it's a good thing. Somebody posted that there's a massive shortage of services and transportation. I wish we had more mass transportation.
Yeah.
Texas and US in general is woefully unbalanced there in mass transportation, I feel.
How many millions of jobs would be created with just building up Texas's infrastructure alone? Texas is such a big state, but I feel like it's so disconnected from itself.
Yeah. I was going to ask about infrastructure too, if it's growing that fast and what kind of services. Are there enough hospitals? Are there enough schools popping up along? Is
Yeah.
that prioritized?
We're seeing the schools pop up like popcorn in a microwave. I think Frisco has 8 high schools now. There's more in Little Elm, Denton, the Colony, Grapevine. There's a whole bunch of suburbs in the north, mostly the north part of Dallas, Fort Worth area are exploding. From what I understand, a similar dynamic is occurring in Houston. And I believe Austin and San Antonio are growing as well. And as Dr. K mentioned, it does, I believe, create some infrastructure gaps. We're in a house it's only 10 years old, 10 or 15 years old, and we had a hard time just getting internet service.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you
So
go.
yeah, things like that. Hopefully it's going to catch up because what I told my wife, and I think what we're seeing is Dallas and probably Fort Worth in Texas are probably slated on the US's list to make the smart cities and mega city type thing, along with LA and New York and Chicago. I think Dallas and Houston, probably Miami and other cities are on that list. So I told my wife, watch this. We're going to have hover cars probably within 5 years.
That'd be awesome.
Wouldn't it?
But I want to say something, Kari, because this is what I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so you're a political scientist. What do you think that what Trump is doing right now when he's saying he wants to claim Greenland and Canada, and he talks about reclaiming the Panama Canal and pulling out of our trade alliances, it seems like internally and externally, he is hijacking the narrative, completely controlling the narrative just to get what he actually wants. And it might be a fraction of everything he's claiming. And that's going to do with the US's strategic partnerships.
Trust is built on consistency and people meeting certain expectations. And this will affect how countries kind of shape their relations with the United States in the future. But there's a distinct difference in how this is working domestically and how this is working internationally.
Hmm.
And a well-informed public that pays attention to global politics will understand how the people that they elect also then affects stability globally. And
Yeah.
it'll come full circle at some point.
You don't think people are just so stupid that they're easily bamboozled by propaganda?
I think that people should be given the opportunity to decide for themselves if they've been given the right information. And
I don't feel that way anymore. Honestly,
well, that's
I think
awfully pessimistic of you.
I think that people are so easily engineered to think a certain way. And TikTok has proved it, man. And now Facebook is doing it too. So people like I remember COVID quite vividly. It sucked. But I heard the Trumpers say, no, things were better under Trump, things were better. Like the news was in our faces that things sucked. But all they needed to do was hear Trump and his team talk about how much better things were, and they believed it.
Yeah. So Geo and Dr. K, this is where we have the opportunity as content creators to provide that information literacy and try to provide the balance.
Yeah.
It's all about democratic resilience too. That's something that is really always a priority of mine. We're really missing shared experiences
Ah,
that people can relate to.
yes.
And that's also important because in groups that have shared experiences, even people with different beliefs that come together can reflect on certain things. It was always the bowling alley analogy that that sociologists use, or it was a church analogy. But now a lot of those things are missing from society, and people are very insular.
Yes.
And I would love to stop that. Really, just kids getting involved in something like scouting.
It's community building. And that what I keep talking about is the only way that like I think America can actually recover from everything that's going on is if we start getting to know our neighbor. If we start building a sense of togetherness, like that we can rely on each other, not for everything, but for certain things. And I think one of the reasons why we were able to get through the Great Depression, to come out stronger, is because people, I don't know if they rebuilt it, but they definitely had it.
Hmm.
What they told me was that back in the day during the Depression, what they did is they all got together, they all pooled what little money they had, and any family that had like that they were definitely getting like their heat or something turned off, everyone would pool their money and they would pay that bill, that money. And they just kept doing that for everybody and they got through it.
Yeah.
And we need that instead of this. I feel like a lot of political propaganda makes us think that we can just survive as these lone mavericks.
Yeah.
You just do it yourself, you build it yourself, and you have, people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or any of these other billionaires, they sell this BS image that they just did everything on their own. And no, these people had a community behind them.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you guys, since you're both on and I have this opportunity, because when I came on is about the time you guys are still talking about the AI. And my
Mm.
question to both of y'all is, this is what I'm understanding from the American diplomacy courses and stuff like that I'm going through now. As the Soviet Union collapsed, and in the 90s, the US floated Russia billions of dollars, and they took advantage of that, and they started building again. And now we're seeing historical continuity on Russians' part, trying to gain what they lost, that aggression. And we invited China into the WTO. We miscalculated that if we brought to them global liberal economy opportunities, that political liberalism would follow, but they're still authoritarian. And we saw their rise, as in a little bit of Russia as well, as we're starting to decline. Are you guys feeling that we're seeing a little bit of Thucydides trap, in that there is a potential for conflict here between the
Dr.
great?
Ting, you want to answer first?
I think we're at a very dangerous time right now, probably one of the most dangerous times since the late 80s. And there were mistakes that were made and assumptions about how states would behave. There are expansionist patterns that Russia, the Soviet Union, the czars have had.
Uh-oh.
She cut out, she got a call.
Right. So you cut off at expansionist tendencies that the SARS and everyone have had, and then let me hear it.
I have a teenage daughter that is not giving up on calling. As I was saying, there are patterns that are easily identifiable. And this optimism that the entire way that Russia or the Kremlin operates had changed. I think that we were too optimistic, and we're learning that now. The question is, what can we do? Another thing is, we have a certain framework for how we understand. This is funny, don't you? We have a certain framework for how we think that the world should function. And we
Yeah.
apply democracy to that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work everywhere. And I think that democracy is a fine thing. And I'm a big supporter of democracy. But this idea that you come in somewhere and you force a type of government was also a big mistake on our part. I tell you what, guys, I have a call. I'm going to jump back in on the live in a couple minutes, okay?
Sure.
Is that all right? Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. No problem.
Gio, let me hear your
Sure.
take on it.
I think America, maybe I'm being a little simple, but I think America has two sides of its diplomacy. There's the ideal diplomacy. Oh, the Berlin Wall fell, communism fell. Wow, the world can be free and everything. And if you even look at the transcripts, like I covered this a lot. If you look at the transcripts of communications between the United States and Russia at that time, like between James Baker and Gorbachev and then George Bush and Boris Yeltsin, there was really optimism. Like these guys, these hardened, ruthless politicians were like, really, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. Like Gorbachev was like, yeah, this is going to be great. So there was like optimism on both sides. But okay, that's one side of the diplomacy. The other side is the DARPA military industrial complex and the big money. And they're like, all right, yeah, everyone's happy. Humans are greedy. Russia's big and powerful. They're going to get greedy again once they're strong enough. And they knew, they're like, okay, China doesn't like us. They're just siding with us to contain Russia's influence. These guys aren't stupid. You know what I mean? Look how we were in World War II. We went from saying, screw Russia to, Russia's our best friend now. And they put out pro-Russia propaganda. So I think that like shadow diplomacy always prevails, but they always get their feet in through the first steps of the ideal diplomacy. So I think what America actually profits from is bailing out our enemies, building them up to be potential competitors. So we have a boogeyman to fool our public against.
Yeah.
To keep the military industrial complex up. And then when it's no longer useful, or if they do play out of bounds, we suffocate them or strangle them. I think we did that to the USSR. Like we bailed them out in World War II. We gave them hundreds of billions of dollars.
Right.
We bailed them out in the fall of communism, but we also rebuilt Japan. And then
Right.
Japan, they're like, oh my gosh, I remember by this time, Japan was supposed to be a bigger economy. But then we start cutting away at their currency. And look what happens. We build up China. And now China's, oh yeah, screw you, blah, blah, blah. We're strangling them and they're going through deflation right now. Their whole manufacturing sector is going through deflation. That's bad for them.
Yeah.
Because they're letting people go. And it also hit the consumer side. Their CPI is also in a deflationary spiral. Their prices are falling, wages are falling, unemployment is rising, and they can't manipulate their currency the way they normally do, because if they try to bring down the value of their currency, it kills their imports, which is what they need for a healthy manufacturing sector. And then they can't inflate the currency because it makes their exports go down less, which will just lead to more unemployment. So it's no matter which way China goes, it's like, I think we are going to see the shrinking of their overall influence to a bit of obscurity. And I think that's part of America's secret sauce.
I think so. I think you're right. I really appreciate that viewpoint. Now, let me ask a follow-up question along those lines, because there's a couple of things. I have an issue and a concern. From what I understand, Warren Buffett and Elon Musk have EV operations in China. Part of that is being exported, and it would seem to be in circumvention of the sanctions, to Russia. So there's concern number one. And concern number two is just for political spectrum perspective, to let everybody know I lean right, a little bit right of center. And it doesn't mean I am super Trumper. I have concerns. I have genuine concerns. It's not so much a personality issue, because if we look at Trump, he's only on the individual level. We still have groups and states and the international order. So my concern is If we're seeing Putinism in Russia, Xiism in China, Milei in Argentina, Farage in Britain, and that getting stronger, and a bunch of other examples like that. And now we have basically what's going to be Trumpism in America. Is that America, and I believe it's shadow governance of transnational elite complex, turning the screws away from international liberal democracy and towards a more anarchical, offensive realism?
Anarchical, huh?
We're talking like real politics. Are we going to see Trump try to basically speak loudly and use a big stick and not be as much into the liberal order? Because he is talking about things like the WTO and the WHO and NATO and things like this.
To me, there's a huge rightward shift. The fact that, he's got Facebook on the right, he's got X on the right. They can really push a huge right-wing ideology. And I've never witnessed anything like this as an adult. I don't know if maybe it was the same way under Reagan, but the people I've spoken to said they haven't seen it like that. They haven't, even under Reagan, they didn't see such a right-wing shift. And I have faith that our Constitution and just our overall government and our military is so big and vast that it can't be manipulated in a 4-year period.
Right.
I'm sorry, the manipulation didn't just start 4 years ago.
I know.
This is a longer plan to destabilize the United States. And this is done with hybrid warfare. And we
Right.
need to really change our definitions of what war is. And we have to realize, and I would encourage everyone to look at the New York Times' opinion piece. They just put a video out about what a shift to authoritarian looks like, or authoritarianism looks like. And there are signs, and one of the first signs is this lack of trust. And Americans no longer trust the government. They no longer trust the media. They're doing their own research. They no longer trust institutions that they should trust. Now, I'm not talking about blind trust. I'm talking about, as a person, you have a value. And in a democratic system, you give part of that value to a representative. And
Sure.
they are mandated with what you have given them as a citizen to make decisions. And that has a value. People are forgetting that. People are thinking that the people that are elected control them, but it's really the other way around. Democracies are very fragile and fickle things. And that's why there are guardrails, division of powers, and checks and balances are some of them. And when those things start to be weakened, it's easy to slide off the road of how your country is being governed.
Do you guys see the funny thing is, and I'm not saying this is bad, but the only time I can say with confidence that America fell into something like this, not a right-wing trap, but where America fell into a presidency and a party that had very little separation of powers and really got to stretch its bounds was under FDR. He got elected for a 3rd term. He got reelected for a 4th term. He almost expanded the Supreme Court. The expansion of government powers that occurred under FDR was like, we still haven't seen that. And there were a lot of groups that weren't just right-wing, but they were like, hey, you're going well out of your purview. When I read about it in history, I'm like, I don't mind that. Like, we were in trouble and he did what had to be done.
And he leveraged off of that momentum from
Yeah.
being able to help people during the Depression.
Yes. But we almost went too far left. And I think his name was Galbraith. He was like one of the Supreme Court justices. He gave this conclusion it's funny, there's a chicken case. It's called the Schechter chicken case. When it's like 1934, I think, where there's this kosher butcher. And I think he was a poultry butcher. And we were so overregulated that there were set price. You couldn't sell chickens or anything. You really couldn't sell anything outside of a certain price level. You couldn't lower the price. You couldn't raise the price. And Schechter, he was accused of altering prices. And he was also accused of not selling proper quality chickens for some reason because he upset a regulator. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court because he kept losing it until finally Schechter wouldn't give his clients chickens that he thought weren't healthy. But the regulation was you reach into the basket, you take whatever chicken goes. And so that was just the rule. And Schechter said, no, I want to give my clients the best chickens.
Yeah.
And so finally, the regulator came in and said, no, you have to go in and you have to give whatever, you have to serve these people the chickens equally. And Galbraith was like, okay, but what happens if all the chickens get out of the way? So he grabs nothing. And apparently that question, it made the whole courtroom laugh. And we started to see a kind of a pullback from an overextension of socialist policy in FDR's first administration. So look up the Schechter chicken case. It was pretty freaking cool. And so there was a straw that broke the camel's back in America, finally said enough. And I'm hoping that if we are going in that direction towards a rightward manner, there is going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back where America, one legal system will be like, no, that's not happening.
Mm.
Oh,
That's my
I, I want to do a hard pivot for a minute, though, but it ties back into what's going on in the United States. I don't know much about Black Hawk helicopters, but we have someone with military experience. And I'd like to know if you have any insights about what happened in Washington with that helicopter.
I'm sorry, Dr. K. I've been in Blackhawks numbers of times. I've rappelled out of them and spy rigged and fast roped and flown real missions and everything, but I don't know the technical side of that house at all. I apologize.
I get asked about certain areas all the time. I've been seeing a lot of things about this. Is there been a connection in the media between lack of staffing? And I know that they said it was understaffed, but the connection between all of the federal jobs that have been put on hold. And I'm seeing that internationally with a lot of the aid programs and a lot of other programs that the United States funds, that things are stopping. Within the United States, are things stopping?
How about this? We've had a shortage of air traffic controllers for almost a decade. And the Trump administration just seems to want to cut more staff, cut more regulations, even if it comes to safety. Last week, he cut, what was it? Was it the FAA along with the TSA? But he cut regulatory committees, like safety committees. He cut them out. Oh, so when we actually need expansions in certain aspects, we're getting cuts. And I'm not saying that was the direct cause, obviously, of what happened, but none of those measures have alleviated the problem. And I'm just going to guess that if we had the air traffic controllers that we needed, and if we didn't just cut all regulation, including safety, with a chainsaw, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Okay, Rebel Intel, you just said that you align more with the right.
Mhm.
What is going right now? What are you seeing that happened since the beginning of the Trump presidency that you can say, I appreciate that this is in the right direction?
Good question, and pretty difficult to address because although I lean a little bit right, I strongly believe that we have a very robust amount of continuity developed and ingrained in our overall systems. And that's why 4 to 8 years from now, Trump came in, the first time he's going to say, he's going to piggyback off of Obama. And then later when Trump's out, Biden will say that was Trump's fault. But the national security strategy, the national intelligence strategy, the national defense strategy, foreign policies, economic policies are all fairly status quo, I think. Now that that's how I asked Geo Husar the questions about, with Trump coming in and signaling the way he is, are we shifting away from that liberal institutionalism? When I see Trump doing the things that he's doing, it's hard to tell yet if something will be effective, what will be effective and such. For example, supposedly shifting 30,000 to an Gitmo detention facility that's not even there yet. And there's a lot of questions about that because I was in Gitmo for 30 months. So I think what Trump is trying to do and his administration is going to try to do is, are we withdrawing And are we becoming protectionist, if not isolationist? Or is Trump signaling more expansionism, as like you guys were talking before about Greenland and Panama Canal and things like that? Because I think he might try to bolster alliances in Philippines even more. What the conservatives try to do is we want to make government more efficient and less bureaucratic and maybe bring in more privatized, because I think if they have migrant operations facility in Gitmold, it's going to have 30,000 beds. They're going to have a lot of private contractors there. That's not going to be Homeland Security or Coast Guard or Navy MPs or the Marine Corps Security Force Company. They're probably going to have hundreds of contractors there. I can almost guarantee it. Is that efficient? I don't know, but there's a lot of things that Trump is signaling that I will say I'm mostly like a John Mearsheimer offensive realist kind of guy. From that perspective, things will look like they could go in the right direction, but is it too bellicose? Is it too belligerent? And so it's yet to be seen. I see the liberal democracies as trying to reach out and gather what is scattered and bring it into a liberal democracy. And I see conservatives sometimes saying, all right, there's enough of this shenanigans. Russia's been messing around too long. China's been messing around too long. I've got to show you I've got a big stick, and that scatters. Yeah.
Do you think though? I don't know. In my lifetime, I would never have thought that I would have seen the conservatives shift to a pro-Russia stand, but that's what I'm seeing.
That was weird.
And it's even, I didn't, I assume that I assume if you grow up from wealth, because I live in an area where there's a lot of wealthy people and I speak to a lot of people who are just born into millionaire families and they're conservatives. They're deeply conservative and they think Russia's the good guy. They think Russia's like a Christian bastion. And I'm like, they've just been Christian again, only for 40 years. It was illegal to be Christian before. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, how? Like, it just, I'm still struggling with the conservative shift that, no, Russia's the good guy.
That was weird to me, but I saw two sides of it. As I saw this coming in, I think there was enough signal that Russia was not playing some type of war game or exercise or training or something like that. They were going to go in with a military invasion. And they'd been signaling to William Burns, who's Biden's CIA director, and he was a Russian ambassador before. He wrote cables about it saying "yet" means "yet." More NATO expansion is going to be a red line for Russia. They're going to see it as a military action and aggressiveness. Now that I'm not saying that excuses Putin's aggressiveness. He's at fault here, but it does take two to tango. And I think that's the side that some people, I don't know if it's entirely on the right. I think there's some on the left too, but it was weird to me that I think it was because of partisanship. I think the people on the right said, this is Biden's war. Screw Biden. I don't like Ukraine. I'm going to side with Russia. And they just blindly followed that. And that's where we come in for information literacy and try to provide that balance.
Gary, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Are you familiar with the Helsinki Agreement in 1975? Yeah. So in 1975, the USSR agreed. The USSR and the US both had this agreement that any European country can choose which alliance it's a part of. So, like, they still all comply with it. So,
So we need to have a discussion about
Sure.
international laws, norms, and international regulations. Because, and this goes back to what you were saying about the United States and some of these, what might be empty expansionist threats or not. You know, you may have heard of the Overton window in communications where, you're both nodding. For those listening that haven't heard of the Overton window, what it is when something becomes socially acceptable to talk about. And it shows a shift in what society accepts. And this is happening now with a member of the Security Council, the United States, claiming that it could invade a country or take back territory that it once belonged to, goes against all international norms. And this has just ripped the Overton window right open. But now you're having also this thing of the United States is creating a lovely distraction. And we have things going on now that we have like in Congo and Rwanda, where Rwanda is using a playbook that was pretty much written by Vladimir Putin. And I'm not talking about ideologically, I'm talking about Rwanda going into damaging the territorial sovereignty, integrity of Congo and saying they're doing it because they were afraid.
Yeah. The DRC, the Democrat. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it doesn't really matter if Trump really does take Greenland or buy Greenland and he renames things and he maybe wants the Panama Canal. Talking about it is pushing that Overton window a little bit more open.
Yeah.
And well, maybe the window's not the best analogy. It's almost like a floodgate. At some point,
Yeah.
it's all coming out. It's going to be hard to close again. And the United States is party to international agreements, but they're not party to all international agreements.
Mhm.
And the International Criminal Court, for example, Vladimir Putin could technically still travel to the United States. There's other places in the world that he can't travel to because they would arrest him because there's an international arrest warrant out for him.
Yeah.
And the United States was never party to this. And this is just going to keep going and going where the United States wants stability. They want peace. They preach a certain thing, but their leader is doing a different thing right now. And it's weakening the system. And it's a system that we still all benefit from, even if we're in the United States. It creates stability in places that have the minerals that make our chips for our phones, and stability in places that supply grain to places in Africa. This is one of the things that people talk a lot about, but
Because
Russia-
people don't care. When people hear about what's going on in Africa, unfortunately, it falls on deaf ears. Although like, that's so far away, it doesn't really affect me. If for some reason they feel like if something happens in China or even Japan, it affects them a little bit more, especially Europe, a little bit of South America. But it just people they're looking at Africa with a 50-year-old set of lenses, and they're not realizing like how much more vital Africa is to the world economy.
and that attitude is why Africa is opening its doors to China with some influence from Russia. And we're going to lose out on opportunities there.
Can I disagree with you on this? This is why I disagree. This is where I was talking to Rebel Intel about this, that there's two sides to American diplomacy. The ideal, which is, hey, let's do something good. And then there's the dark side. That's like the money and the DARPA. And I think the dark side is just, okay, China, absolutely. You can build Africa, throw your resources into building African infrastructure. And then when these countries are developed enough, we will start trading with them based off of what you spent. And China puts aggressive loans with aggressive rates on these countries. America can say, hey, baby, what's wrong? You need someone to help. That's what America can do. So I think it's a very dark and patient methodology. That's like, if I had no conscience and a lot of money, that's what I would do.
Now, in terms of critical thinking, think about that. Before I talked about the pattern of Russia and the Kremlin over centuries. And now look at what you just said about U.S. foreign policy.
Yes.
And there's also a pattern that's identifiable there. The question is, what motivates people? In the United States, I think the motivation is money. In Russia, it's power. And in some ways, there's an overlap. But if you can identify the motivation, it might help you be able to determine what's going to happen next. And this ties back into the social media thing. People are trying to control how Americans get their information.
Yeah.
It was the distrust of media, and then is now a fragmentation that's taking place. However, of this fragmentation, the people involved with controlling some of these major platforms are all coming together with Donald Trump. And that's something we need to be concerned about.
Yeah, that's another thing that's concerning to me. Again, I said, I'm not spouting Putin talking points or being apologist for Putin or Russia regarding the Russia-Ukraine situation. and there is the Helsinki and things like that. But if we consider that there are a number of academic materials where they have talked about NATO expansion and NATO expansion post the collapse of Soviet Union, it was burgeoning a little bit despite the lack of Soviet Union being that type of menace anymore. And we have William Burns' cable that's out there now because of WikiLeaks. And again, it's not right for Putin's aggression, but I always say it takes two to tango. I feel like
Who are you saying tangled then? You think it was NATO or the US?
Yeah, it takes two because NATO has been able to get more countries in its membership along Russia's borders. Russia views that as a threat. The only problem is when Russia takes land, they use bullets and
Right.
death.
Right.
NATO takes land, they say, here's an application. You have to wait a few years. You have to fulfill a lot of criterion before you can go into our group. But, and the reason why I just can't agree with your argument, Rebel Intel, is that NATO doesn't start wars. Russia starts wars. NATO doesn't start. Like, if you attack a NATO country, then war comes to you. But NATO doesn't go, oh, I'm going to invade first.
So here's the point I'm trying to make, though, especially since they, at least to 2008, not only did they have William Burns, French, German, and other intelligence experts telling them what the red lines were. And since we have the theory of Russian historical continuity, and we already knew what Putin and Russia was doing in Chechnya and Georgia, is it reasonable to assume that they knew what Putin's actions were going to be? And I personally think, and again, I'm not being an apologist for Putin. I'm not siding with Russia. I'm saying that I feel like there's reasonable inferences that it was engineered, and it goes to your argument about the military industrial complex, which is global.
See, do you mind if I say anything, Dr. K, or do you?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think it was a good gamble for the military industrial complex because they can say NATO's expanding. And if Russia's not going to invade a country, Russia has nothing to worry about because all NATO expansion means is that Russia can't invade their neighbors. That's all it means. It's just, hey, Russia, you can't bully this country anymore like you've done for the past 5 centuries. But that's the other thing. And now the benefit is we get that. And if Russia does want to invade, if they actually do invade because one of these other countries, because of NATO expansion, then NATO will still expand in an accelerated manner like it did, and more money gets spent to weaken Russia, like a small amount of money to weaken our most potent adversary. And it's worked if you were, again, somebody with no conscience, but a lot of money and resources, worked brilliantly because no American troops are dying. We're sending old weaponry. We're testing other weapons with Ukrainians, and Russian soldiers are just, they're depleting. Russia's lost tens of billions of dollars of resources. They've lost their diplomatic standing. They won't recover to what they were for at least a generation. And that's a hypothetical. That's something I would definitely attribute to Winston Churchill. Remember, Stalin said that about Winston Churchill, he's a bastard, but he's our bastard. Because like, even Stalin was scared by Winston Churchill because of how calculating he was.
So does this play into the national security strategy of containing Russia? It's been our strategy for decades. Contain Russia. They're playing the game. Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard. They're playing the game. Did they possibly at least partially engineer this, and Putin fell into the trap?
But I don't think Vladimir Putin falls into many traps. I think this has been something that he's been planning for many years. And he's been setting things up. It doesn't really matter if anything was constructed or not. Right now, the discussion in Europe is about defense spending.
Yeah.
The military industrial complex is going to profit from this.
Yeah.
The question is how much and how do we calculate what costs are?
Yeah.
As this war continues and if it spreads, is it worth now investing and sending equipment into Ukraine to stop it or to deal with the aftermath? And I unfortunately don't have the economic background to do that calculation where if part of Ukraine or most of Ukraine would go to Russia, what would that mean for global stability? What would that mean for the economies? What would that mean for how much money we would have to invest in security in the future? And that is something that people really need to talk about. The almost the lesser of two evils discussion.
Yeah.
If Russia did, which I hope it doesn't happen, but if Russia did manage to take those 2 pieces of land, it would just embolden more spending in our military industrial complex and European budgets. They would, if Russia actually increased their size even by a little bit, those little 2 pieces of land, I think we would see a huge spike in defense spending as a comparison to our GDP, not just in America, all over Europe, because we are spending very little on defense. I know the numbers sound like a lot, but we're
Yeah.
spending at 3% of our GDP. That's the smallest percentage of our GDP. Like in the 50s, we were averaging about 10% of our total GDP just on defense.
That's
Now,
a good point.
It was
Russia's
between
going to be
five.
spending 30%.
What was
Yep.
that?
30% in 2025.
Who is?
Russia.
Russia. 30% in 2025, 2 trillion. Okay, 30% of their GDP. Now, what's interesting about that is, okay, that means the economy that was just meant to keep the rest of the population at some quality of life is shrunken, all going to the military. And their military is getting not obliterated, but it's a war of attrition left and right. And since they switched to a wartime economy, they've become even more reliant on oil and gas. And guess what? Ukraine has been successfully attacking every week. They have been destroying Russian oil refineries. They have been destroying Russian gas stores where they're shutting down. They can't operate because the drones just keep.
Yeah.
So Russia is running out of oil and natural gas to supply their own troops. They're also running out of oil and natural gas to supply with exports to fund this war. And so Russia's spending, if they're spending 30%, they're losing a huge chunk of that because their critical infrastructure for maintaining war is being targeted. And I think when it comes to Putin not falling for traps, I think something's gone to his head because from what I read, he was given intel that Ukraine would welcome Russian troops, that there would be minimal to no resistance. That's just what I've read. That's also just the Russian people I've been spoken to, that Putin was given intel. Yeah, we can absolutely do this. We can have this done. Just like he was given intel that, yes, you guys have great hypersonics. We have great hypersonics. And then what happens? His troops go in. He sends in his best tank battalion into Ukraine, and that didn't win. And then also, a lot of Russian aerospace engineers were accused of treason. The ones who worked on the Kinzhal were arrested, accused of treason because the Kinzhals apparently weren't so Kinzhal-ish. They were claimed. And if Russia didn't fall into a trap, maybe America nudged them like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, you can do it. You're thinking of doing that? Sure.
I see Dr. K is thinking about a good response here.
I think that this is what we can learn when a leader surrounds himself with people that only tell him what he wants to hear.
Yep.
And we should be aware of that in other situations. When there's retribution in systems, when civil servants aren't there to do their job in a nonpartisan way, it is difficult then to get information to a leader so they can make good decisions. And this is something that I think might have affected Vladimir Putin. It also has been said on different occasions throughout the full-scale invasion that how many troops have actually died wasn't really being communicated directly to the Kremlin.
Yeah.
And we all know how, and if you follow Ukrainian media, how there is a reason why you might want to not be honest about poor job performance in the Russian military.
Yes.
Not only does it go back to corruption and skimming money up the top and bad vehicle maintenance and no diesel for the trucks and all of these things that affected the initial invasion on the 24th of February, but it goes to reporting structures and people being afraid to say what's really happening on the ground.
And we'll be dealing with that here.
Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud. I was going to just lead people to
No,
make their
let
own
me, no,
decisions.
no, let me take the
There
brunt.
are
Let me
some,
take the
there are
brunt.
some
Don't let them hate me. Don't, like, you're a nice person. Don't let them, seriously. I get inundated with like thousands of F you, screw you, you liberal, blah, 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 blah.
I want to point something out. My cat is actually named Roger and makes an appearance in some of my videos. And there is a Roger the cat here in the comments. So this every time this Roger tops, I'm like, did my cat start to get an account? Defenestration happens. Get over it. Yeah, but I'd rather live in a place where there's rule of law.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And that's another good point because as I think I'm seeing a lot of now I can hang with people on the left and Democrats, liberals, et cetera. What I'm seeing on social media more is people attacking who they perceive to be people on the far right or MAGA and saying China's going to take over. And they're putting out basically Chinese misinformation about how great it is. But as I mentioned before, we're seeing the rise of China, but China is still an authoritarian state. And look at Russia, like everything you guys have been mentioning about Russia, it's in decline and it's not going to come back anytime soon.
China's in a lot of trouble. Like, they're still powerful. They have a lot of influence. They have a great manufacturing sector. They have a very large armed forces and everything. But it's the same thing. There's a bottleneck of power. And the guy in charge of China, I don't want to say his name because I might get censored, but
Oh,
man, if I criticize any government too much, then like also I just see my live access suspended. Oh yeah. If he doesn't get information he likes, then yeah, you get punished. And not just that, but when if the leader of China says, hey, I want to build more railways across the entire country, it will happen. And sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's bad. And some decisions can have long-lasting consequences. Deng Xiaoping with the one-child policy in 1980 seemed like a good idea because the birth rate was like 4 or 5 Chinese per family. And then they were like, okay, you can only have one, but they let that go on for 35 years until 2015.
yeah, change is hard.
Yeah, and because I don't think that Xiaoping really took into the consideration the cultural ramifications of this, that Chinese families, like most traditional families, sadly prefer to have boys. So if they had a girl, guess what? And now there's between the ages of like 11 to 40, there's like 1.3 or 1.4 man to 1 woman in China. So they have a shrinking population, which has already been shrinking for a few years. But they don't have enough women. And these women don't seem to want to have kids as much.
That's an interesting point. And as we're seeing this authoritarianism in both China and Russia and potential decline, I'm going to predict that we're not going to see much modern day true perestroika or glasnost that opens the information up so people can see what's really going on there. We just got back from Japan and Seoul, Korea, and we saw advertisements for basically like mail order brides of the Koreans to be brides for Chinese out there.
Yep. Yeah. Guys, I gotta go. You two should finish this off.
We'll pick up or something, don't you? This is what I was
not now. Now I'm gonna go to the gym. I promised myself I'm going to the gym because I climb on this like ladder thingy. Like I do cardio and then it's a Jacob's ladder. Holy, it kicks yeah, exactly. Oh, it's a Trump dance.
Okay, let me
Crap out of me.
close.
Yeah.
Let me close with 2 book suggestions. A little bit tougher, but this talking about who is going to be in a coalition with who and which countries are going to join together. Anne Applebaum's Autocracy, Inc. It is downloadable as a book that you can listen to. She reads it herself. She talks about how leaders are finding this connection. She is an excellent historian. And then the next one is from someone out of the UK called Political Technology. And it discusses how Russia developed ways to influence elections, not actually technology as in terms of like computers and stuff, but they're translating a bunch of the terms from Russia. It also talks more about Paul Manafort, who seems to be popping around the White House again, and how he was involved in learning some of these skills from Russia. It's a comparison of what happened in Russia and the United States. And I'm only read half the book. Great resource just to understand how votes are influenced. And there's a good discussion of what motivates country, power or money.
All right. So guys, you should stay on.
No, I'm going to order a burger. I'm in Europe. And
Okay. All right.
hotel rooms. I'm going to get room service and watch Netflix.
Okay. No problem. All right. Then it was great talking to you guys. I'm going to put this on YouTube. Probably give me like a day or two, and we'll see how it does. If you're not following Dr. K and Rebel Intel, do yourself a favor and correct that mistake.
Thank you
very
guys.
much. It was lovely seeing you. Thanks, Rebel Intel. It was great to
Great
join us.
conversation.
Bye.